All right, folks, today in this quick hit, we're going to talk about putting your decks together and then how the game of maneuver warfare actually starts in terms of how the domains, which are the terrain that you fight your opponent in, actually get laid down. First part is pretty easy. We talked about all the different types of cards last time. While there's roughly 80 to 90 cards that both the red and the blue players have available to them, but you only get to pick 30 that go into your deck. Once you've got your cards down to 30, you combine them with your action cards, and that creates your entire deck. Now, something to note is one of the elements of strategy here is the game rules allow you, if you want, you can have more of the maneuver cards and fewer of the action cards in order to have more things that you can put on the battlefield. And you can swap them out basically one for one. So, for example, if you want to have 35 maneuver cards of different types because you want lots of naval firepower or you want lots of friction cards, you want something else, then you're just deducting 5 of your action cards away from your main decks. So long as the total adds up to 60, then that's the number that matters. Once you've selected those cards, as long as they add up to 30, you're just going to put your cards together in their deck, and then we get to how the game actually starts. Players are going to determine who has initiative going into the game. Very simple. You shuffle up all of your action cards. Once you're shuffled, both players are going to flip over the top card in their deck. You're looking for the white Fog of War number, which is your generic Fog of War number. Whoever's got the higher number gets to go first and has initiative. Having determined who has initiative, the players are going to go through the domain laydown procedure, which is how you build out your battlefield. The way I designed this game is that no two battlefields are ever going to look the same. The only consistent things that are going to be in each battlefield are your information and space domains. They are a permanent part of every game. If you choose not to put any cards in there, that's entirely your choice for your approach to victory. But just keep in mind, if you don't put anything in there and your opponent does, you could be in for a bad day because the things in the space and information domains can still have impacts on the terrestrial domains. So once you've got the space and information domains down, both players are going to start doing their selection from your deck of domain cards, going in the order in which player who had the first initiative gets to draw first. So the player who has initiative, selecting their first domain, they have a maritime heavy deck, so they decide they want to have a port, because a port is a littoral transition point, which means they can both put their ships in there, but also move their naval logistics ships into there to conduct humanitarian aid, which is a key way of both draining opponents' will and recovering your own will in the game. Now, as it happens, the other player is playing a very land-heavy deck. So they decide that they want to put down some farmland to have some maneuver space for their ground combat units to be able to go. And so each player is going to alternate doing this, placing down the cards that they selected in the beginning of the game one at a time. Now, players can place these cards wherever they want to in the order of their turn. This means that there may be occasions where, to disrupt your player's strategy, you may want to insert one of your own cards into a place that might give your opponent a pretty unfortunate time. In this case, we're just going to do kind of a straight example. Both players decide that they want to sort of maintain the integrity of their respective sides of the battlefield, and so they're not going to mess with each other at this point. So what we see here in the zoomed out view is that symmetric battlefield. You've got maritime domains here over on the right, and you've got a bunch of land domains over here on the left. Looks like a nice and clean battlefield where both players get what they want, but that's not the end of it. So the next thing that's going to happen is player who does not have initiative is going to randomly select 3 domains from anywhere in the domain deck and then select where those domains are going to go inside the domain layout that's already on the table. So what our player has selected are a jungle, which is a extreme land domain, some islands, a couple islands actually, and decides that they're going to keep their side of the board straightened out, but they want to start messing with the other player's laydown of where their port fit nice and neatly with the rest of the maritime environment. So now the battlefield has gotten a little bit messier, and we also have a few places where we're going to have to adjust for the laws of planet Earth to make sure we're obeying laws of physics, plate tectonics, all those things. So among the rules are, in cases where you have land domains directly next to open water or maritime domains, you need some sort of transition point, whether that's a port or a coastline. Looking at how the other domains have laid out, islands can go next to this maritime domain, that's okay. Islands in between other maritime domains, that's okay. And then we've got a port over here as that littoral transition point. And so really all we need is players going to go back into full set of domain decks, look for a littoral transition point. We got a coastline. and then having inserted the coastline next to the jungle to create that littoral transition, the basic domain laydown is now complete. But that is not the end of the story. Very last thing we're going to do is take the domain variable cards, and if you recall from the last video, these cards are everything from environmental factors to key terrain and objectives that players may want to control during the game to drain their opponent's will to fight. So again, shuffling up all of the domain variables, player with initiative is then going to put one down on each and every single domain that we have out in the game. And then once all the domain variables are laid down, they all get flipped over to see which ones actually will stay in the game and which ones don't. So the text of the domain variable cards will indicate whether or not it applies to the domain that it's laid on top of. Very simple. If it doesn't match the domain that's on top of, it comes out of the game. So let's see, we got squalls. Those only apply to maritime domains. That's not going to stick. Same thing with heavy sea state. Doesn't apply to space. Ransomware attack is only for information, so that doesn't apply. Solar flare, only space. That doesn't apply. Kessler effect comes off. Heavy flooding in the land portion of the domain. So this will stay in the game, and we'll insert that here in a second. Clear air turbulence, that affects the airspace above that domain, so that's certainly going to stay as well. We have key terrain in the land domain here. Now the islands are both maritime and land, which means the key terrain card is only going to come into play if a player has a ground combat unit here and controls that domain with that ground unit. Then we have an objective. That definitely is going to stay because that applies to any type of domain except for space and information. Convective system, all right, that goes in the airspace above that port domain, so that'll stay. We got another objective here on the farmland, and we got wildfires, but that only applies to land domains, so that's going to come off out of the game as well. So now we have the final laydown on the battlefield that this game is going to be played on. We've got a couple of objectives that are out on the table that players can try and exert control over. We have key terrain on the land domain here on the island, so players who have ground combat units can use that to drain their opponent's will as well. And then we have some bad weather systems that are going to affect the airspace on this domain, and then some flooding, which is going to affect any ground combat units in that domain. Basically, if you're not an amphibious ground combat unit, you're not going to be able to move through that domain. So this is the battlefield that is going to be fought on for this game.